I used to think money was just numbers, a silent thing, a tool.
I didn't understand it could become a spotlight, one that drags every ugly secret in a family into the open and burns you alive under it.
6 months after my maternal grandfather died, a lawyer called and told me he'd left me an inheritance large enough to change my entire life. I remember standing in my kitchen, staring at the wall like it was suddenly moving. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Grief was still sitting in my chest like wet cement, and now it was mixed with something else, fear. Because I knew my family.
I knew what desperation did to people who already had a history of using love like a bargaining chip.
So I told almost no one, only my husband Nathan. And later, against my better judgment, I told my sister Bella because she called me sobbing about being evicted. I wired her enough to cover 6 months of rent and basic expenses. I made her promise, swear, she wouldn't tell anyone, especially not our father, especially not his mother. Bella cried into the phone and said, "I would never do that to you."
2 weeks later, I got a text from my father.
A man who hadn't spoken to me in over 3 years. Casual, friendly, like we were normal. The next day, my brother admitted Bella had told him, and he'd told our father. That's when the air in my home changed. It wasn't just anxiety anymore, it was the sensation of being watched. First, my grandmother called me, warm, sugary, fake, asking about my children like she hadn't spent years treating me like I wasn't Korean enough. Then she showed up at my house and talked about her health problems, while her eyes kept roaming over my furniture, my walls, my life, measuring what she could take. And when my father arrived uninvited during her visit, it hit me with nauseating clarity. This wasn't reconciliation. This was an invasion. I asked them to leave. The next morning, I walked outside and saw my car sitting in the driveway like a wounded animal. All 4 tires were slashed, and the security footage showed my father doing it at 2 a.m. That was the moment I realized the inheritance wasn't a blessing anymore. It was bait. And my own family had decided I was the easiest thing to hunt. Before the inheritance, I thought I already knew what betrayal looked like. In my mind, betrayal was loud. Someone slamming a door, screaming something cruel, making it undeniable. But the kind I grew up with was quieter. It was the slow, constant way love got handed out in my family like it had rules, and I was never the one who benefited from them. I'm 25. Married to Nathan, 27, and we have 2 kids. Emma is 7. Jason is still little enough that he still crawls into our bed some nights when he has a bad dream. Our life is not glamorous, but it's steady. We budget, we save. We argue over stupid things like who forgot to buy milk, and then we laugh 20 minutes later because we're tired and human and we actually like each other. My grandfather on my mother's side was the reason I believed stability was even possible. When my parents divorced, I was 10. And the world cracked in half. My father, Arthur, is half Korean and half American. My mother, Diane, is Irish American. Their split wasn't just painful, it was messy, bitter, and poisoned by my father's family, especially his mother, Soo-jin. Soo-jin never accepted my mother. Not quietly, not politely. She was the kind of woman who could insult you with a smile and then act shocked if you reacted. She made comments about my mother's lack of culture, and later, when my siblings and I were forced into awkward family visits, she made it very clear she saw us as diluted, not fully acceptable, not Korean enough. And here's the part that still makes my stomach twist even now. My father let her. At first, he tried to keep one foot in each world, but little by little, he drifted. He moved back into his parents' house. He became colder, more distant. Eventually, it turned into a pattern. He stayed connected to my younger sister Bella and my brother Jake, but he cut me off almost completely. Not because I did something terrible, because I challenged him. Because at some point, I stopped swallowing the excuses and said out loud what nobody else wanted to say. You abandoned us. After that, it was like I became the enemy, the difficult daughter, the one who doesn't understand family. My mother didn't cope well with the divorce either. Depression turned into drinking. Drinking turned into disappearing. She'd reappear when she needed money, or a couch, or a fresh start, and then vanish again the moment life got hard, or the moment she got bored. I learned early not to rely on her promises. So my grandfather stepped in. He wasn't wealthy in an obvious way. He didn't throw money around. He lived modestly. But he showed up. He took me to doctor appointments. He went to school events when my parents didn't. He remembered the things I liked: books, art supplies, little routines that made me feel safe. He was the stable point in my life when everything else spun. When he died last year, I felt like someone had reached inside me and pulled out the part that believed I'd always have at least one person who didn't leave. So when the lawyer called 6 months later and told me about the inheritance, I didn't feel excited. I felt terrified. Because I've read enough, lived enough, to know money doesn't just change your life. It changes how people look at you. It turns relatives into accountants. It turns old grudges into family rights. It turns strangers into friends and friends into negotiators. Nathan and I agreed immediately. Keep it quiet. We planned to be responsible with it. Secure investments, college funds for Emma and Jason, paying off the mortgage, donating a portion to the children's hospital that helped Emma when she was born with respiratory issues. That hospital wasn't just a place to us. It was the reason my daughter got to grow up.
So no, we weren't going to waste the money.
We were going to protect it.
And I truly believed the hardest part would be managing the inheritance itself. Paperwork, advisors, decisions.
I didn't realize the real danger would come from something much closer. A crying phone call from my sister, a promise she couldn't keep, and a family that didn't see me as a daughter or a sister, but as a resource. The night Bella called me, I was folding laundry on the couch. It was ordinary, mundane. The kids were already asleep, the TV humming quietly in the background while Nathan rinsed dishes in the kitchen. When I saw her name on my phone, my first reaction wasn't irritation, it was worry. Bella doesn't call unless something is wrong. Her voice cracked the second I said hello. She told me she was being evicted. She said her landlord had posted a notice. She said she was behind on rent, behind on utilities, behind on everything. She said she tried to pick up extra shifts, but nothing was enough. She was crying so hard I had to ask her to slow down, just to understand her. I've helped Bella before, not recklessly but carefully. Groceries, a bill here and there, gas money so she could get to work. Every time I told myself it was temporary. Every time I believed she'd figure it out. This time the amount she needed was bigger. I sat there staring at a sock twisted in my hands, feeling the weight of the inheritance pressing against my ribs like a secret that was trying to claw its way out. I told Nathan everything after I hung up. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening, the way it does when he knows I'm struggling with something emotional, not logical.
I can help her, I said finally, without risking us.
He nodded. If you do, set boundaries, clear ones. So I called Bella back,
and I told her.
Not the amount, not the details, just that Grandpa had left me money, enough that I could help her without putting my family in danger. Her reaction was immediate. Relief first, gratitude second. She cried again, this time softer, saying she didn't know what she'd do without me. She promised, unprompted, that she wouldn't tell anyone, especially not our father. I remember pausing before I believed her. I remember saying, very clearly, if Dad finds out, he will try to come back into my life for the money. I'm not joking, Bella. This would destroy everything. She swore, over and over. So I transferred enough to cover 6 months of rent and basic expenses. Not luxury, not comfort, just breathing room. For exactly 2 weeks, everything was quiet. And then my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Arthur, my father. The message was painfully normal. Hey, just checking in. How are you? I stared at it like it might start moving on its own. I didn't reply. The next day, Jake called me. He sounded casual, almost cheerful, like he was calling to ask about the weather. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation, he mentioned Grandpa's money.
Just dropped it.
My stomach went cold. I asked him where he heard that. He hesitated, then said Bella told him. I hung up and called her immediately. She tried to minimize it, said Jake had pressured her, said she didn't think he'd tell Dad, said she didn't realize it would be a big deal. A big deal. I could feel something inside me cracking. Not breaking yet, but fracturing along old, familiar lines. Within days, the family that had ignored me for years suddenly remembered I existed. My grandmother called. Sujine. She spoke to me like we were close, like she hadn't spent my childhood treating me as an inconvenience. She asked about my children, said she wanted to meet her great-grandbabies. Her voice was sweet, calculated. Against my instincts, I agreed to a short visit. People change, I told myself. They didn't. When she came to my house, she didn't look at me the way a grandmother looks at family. She scanned the room. She complained about her health, mentioned an expensive hip replacement she might need, asked pointed questions about our finances, commented on everything we owned like she was mentally adding it up. And then my father showed up, uninvited. That's when I knew this wasn't coincidence. This was strategy. By the end of the visit, Arthur asked if they could help manage my inheritance. Manage. I told them to leave. They acted confused, hurt, offended. But the truth was sitting heavy in the room. They didn't come to reconnect. They came to collect. And that was just the beginning. The morning after I asked my father and grandmother to leave my house, I walked outside with my coffee still warm in my hands. I remember thinking about nothing in particular, just the weather, just the quiet, just how strange it felt that my heart was still pounding even though the house was calm again. Then I saw my car. At first, my brain refused to process what my eyes were telling it. Something was wrong with the way it sat. Too low, like an animal crouching unnaturally. I took a few steps closer. The coffee slipped from my fingers and splashed onto the driveway. All four tires were flat. Not punctured, not slowly deflated. Slashed. Deep, violent cuts. Rubber torn open like someone wanted to make absolutely sure I couldn't drive anywhere. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My chest tightened so sharply I had to bend forward, hands braced on my knees, like my body was trying to protect me from the full impact of what this meant. Nathan came running out when he heard me gasp. He didn't say anything at first. He just crouched next to the tires, jaw locked, then stood up slowly. "Someone did this on purpose," he said unnecessarily. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. "We checked the security footage together." The timestamp burned itself into my memory. 2:03 a.m. There was my father, Arthur, his face clear, his posture casual. He didn't rush. He took his time, slashed one tire, walked around the car, slashed the next, like it was a chore, like he was trimming a hedge. I felt something break inside me. Not dramatically, not explosively, but cleanly, like a cord snapping. This wasn't anger. This was threat. I called the police. When the officer asked if I wanted to press charges, I hesitated. That hesitation still embarrasses me. Years of conditioning kicked in automatically. The instinct to protect family, to soften consequences, to believe that if I just handled things gently enough, they'd stop. I told the officer I wanted a report, but not charges. Yet, that decision bought them time, and they used every second of it. Over the next week, mail started disappearing from our mailbox. Bills, bank statements, a package that never arrived. Nathan installed another camera. 2 days later, the footage showed my grandmother, Sue Jin, reaching into our mailbox like she owned it. Calm, deliberate. This time I didn't hesitate. I filed another police report. Then they escalated again. Arthur and Sue Jin started showing up at the house when I wasn't home, cornering Nathan, trying to charm or intimidate him into letting them inside. He refused every time. They messaged me on social media from new accounts when I blocked the old ones. Emails followed. Long, rambling messages that swung wildly between guilt and entitlement. Then my mother called. Diane. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. She didn't ask how I was. She asked for money. A fresh start, she said. A chance to get her life together. When I asked how she even knew about the inheritance, she admitted Bella had told her. I hung up without another word. That night, Nathan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. "This isn't going to stop," he said quietly. "We need to think about the kids." I wanted to argue. I wanted to believe we could just outlast it. But then I saw Arthur's car parked across the street 3 nights in a row. Engine off, lights off, just sitting there, watching. That's when fear finally outweighed denial. We decided to move, quietly, quickly. And that's when Arthur texted me, asking to meet, just the two of us, to clear the air. Against my instincts, against Nathan's concerns, against every warning my body was screaming at me, I agreed. I met him at a coffee shop inside a busy mall, public, neutral. For an hour, he played the role of the remorseful father. He apologized. He acknowledged mistakes. He blamed his mother. He asked about my life. But something was wrong. He kept checking his phone, over and over. When I got home, my stomach dropped before I even reached the porch. The front door was wide open. Our house had been ransacked, jewelry gone, Nathan's gaming equipment gone, things we hadn't packed yet because we hadn't expected betrayal to move this fast. The security footage told the rest of the story. Sue Jin breaking in through the back door, Jake standing watch, Arthur's car parked a few blocks away. The meeting had been a distraction, a setup. That was the moment I stopped hoping my family would change and started doing what I should have done from the beginning. I pressed charges. The police station smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. I remember sitting in a plastic chair, hands clasped so tightly my fingers hurt, while an officer explained my options in a calm, practiced voice. Charges, evidence, statements, timelines. All words I understood intellectually. None of them prepared me for the emotional whiplash of saying my own family members' names out loud and attaching the word crime to them. My father, my grandmother, my brother. Nathan sat beside me the entire time. He didn't speak unless I looked at him, but every time I did, he nodded. Steady, grounded, like an anchor, holding me in place. When the officers reviewed the footage, there was no debate, no ambiguity. They were arrested that night. I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow. Back home, the house felt violated in a way I couldn't articulate. Even after the police left, even after the door was repaired, I kept walking from room to room touching things. Walls, furniture, the kids' toys. Like I needed to reassure myself that they were still real, still mine. Emma asked why the police had been in our house. I told her someone had done something very wrong and the police were helping us stay safe. She nodded, too young to understand, but old enough to sense fear. That night, she slept between Nathan and me, her small hand gripping my shirt like she was afraid I'd disappear. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face on the security footage, calm, purposeful, familiar. I replayed the coffee shop conversation again and again, catching all the moments that had felt off. The phone checks, the way he steered the conversation to keep me there just a little longer. I had been played, and the worst part was how easily it had worked. The next day, guilt crept in, quiet and poisonous. Was I overreacting? Had I escalated things too far? These thoughts slithered into my head like they belonged there, reinforced by a lifetime of being told I was dramatic, difficult, too sensitive. I caught myself wondering if I should have handled it privately, if I should have just given them some money and made it stop. Then I remembered the slashed tires, the stolen mail, the break-in, the look on my kids' faces when the police walked through their home, and the guilt dissolved into something colder. Clarity. Over the next few days, the fallout began. Arthur had a previous theft conviction. I hadn't known. That detail landed like a punch to the gut. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was a pattern. Soo-jin suddenly became frail. Doctor's notes appeared. She spoke about her health like it was a shield. Jake cried. He said he'd just been following directions, that he didn't think it would go this far. I didn't argue. I didn't comfort. I was done translating other people's cruelty into excuses. We obtained restraining orders. Against all of them. The judge's voice was steady, firm, unquestionable as she laid out the boundaries. Distance requirements. No contact. No third-party communication. For the first time in my life, someone in authority had drawn a line for me. We moved faster after that. A gated community. Security. Cameras everywhere. Locks that beeped when engaged. I hated how necessary it all felt. Bella called from a friend's phone. She begged me to drop the charges. Said Jake was being manipulated. Said Soo-jin was sick. Said our father was still our father. Her voice cracked in places that felt rehearsed. I told her no. And when I hung up, I realized something that surprised me. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would, because somewhere between the break-in and the arrest, the image I had of my family had finally shattered. Not into dramatic pieces. Into dust. The money, the inheritance that started all of this, sat untouched. I hadn't spent $1 beyond what I'd given Bella. What was supposed to bring security had instead stripped away every illusion I had about who my family really was. Nathan asked me one night if I regretted telling Bella. I thought about it, and then I shook my head. No, I said. I regret believing she wouldn't use it. That was the difference. Not generosity. Not kindness. Belief. And it was gone. I thought once the arrests happened, things would slow down. I was wrong. That's the lie we tell ourselves when we finally stand up for the first time, that the conflict will burn itself out once the truth is exposed. But when people are backed into a corner and money is involved, they don't retreat. They regroup. The first escalation came quietly, wrapped in legal language. A letter arrived from a lawyer representing my grandmother, Soo-jin. Thick paper, formal tone, carefully chosen words. It claimed my grandfather's inheritance rightfully belonged to the family and demanded I share it or face a legal challenge to the will. I sat at the kitchen table reading it while Nathan made coffee, the sound of the machine too loud in the silence. She has no standing, my lawyer said later that day, flipping through the pages with visible irritation. Your grandfather wasn't related to her. This is intimidation, nothing more. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. 2 days later, Bella showed up at my workplace. I was walking out of a meeting when I saw her standing near the reception desk, eyes red,
hair pulled back like she'd made an effort to look harmless. My stomach dropped.
She didn't ask permission. She didn't care that people were watching. She started crying, saying she was scared, that Soo-jin was threatening her, that our father's family was pressuring her to help them. She begged me to drop the charges against Jake, said he was just a pawn. My coworkers stared. My face burned.
I told her, quietly, firmly, to leave. When she didn't, security stepped in. My boss called me into his office the next day, concern written all over his face, and asked if I needed time off.
Explaining your family's criminal behavior to your employer is a special kind of humiliation. And it didn't stop there. Relatives from my mother's side began reaching out.
Aunts, cousins, people I barely knew, invitations disguised as concern, conversations that circled back to money with impressive precision.
One cousin asked for a loan for a business idea.
An aunt invited us to dinner and spent the entire evening talking about tuition costs. I blocked numbers until my phone felt lighter in my hand. Then my mother showed up,
Drunk. At our new house, despite the fact that we had never given her the address. She demanded to see the kids, screamed when I refused, accused me of being selfish, cruel, heartless. Neighbors came out. Someone called security.
After she left, shaking and furious, I reviewed the camera footage.
She had walked the perimeter of our house first, peered into windows, memorized the layout. That night, I called my lawyer again. We filed for another restraining order. Nathan found out our phone numbers had been shared in a family group chat we'd never been part of. We changed them, changed emails, locked down every social media account, told the kids' school to implement a password system. The inheritance advisor suggested a trust. We agreed immediately. Then the calls came from unknown numbers. Jake, begging for money for a lawyer, claiming he was forced, promising he'd tell the truth. I recorded the call and handed it to the police. Violating a restraining order doesn't look good for someone already on thin ice. The stress began to show in my body.
I stopped sleeping, jumped at every sound, checked the security system obsessively. Nathan tried to hide how tired he was, but I saw it in the way his shoulders stayed tense even when we were sitting on the couch.
Emma asked why Aunt Bella didn't visit anymore.
I told her some adults make unsafe choices and we need to keep our family safe.
She nodded, then asked if that meant she did something wrong. That question broke something inside me.
The inheritance, the money my grandfather had intended to protect me, had become a magnet for every unresolved resentment, every untreated addiction, every moral shortcut in my family. It wasn't creating new monsters.
It was revealing old ones. And just when I thought the situation couldn't possibly get worse, the truth came out. Text messages recovered from my father's phone showed Bella hadn't been pressured. She had planned this. The eviction story was a lie. The desperation was staged. She'd told my father about the inheritance the day after I sent the money. She and Jake had discussed ways to get more. Jake hadn't been coerced. He'd suggested the break-in.
The meeting at the coffee shop?
A distraction.
I sat in my lawyer's office listening to him explain it all, my hands numb in my lap, my heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest.
The betrayal wasn't accidental. It was strategic. That was when something inside me shifted. I stopped hoping they would understand. I stopped wondering if I could fix it. I stopped carrying responsibility that was never mine. Because you can't negotiate with people who see you as a resource instead of a human being. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was ready to end it. The night I finally broke, nothing dramatic happened. No phone call, no court notice, no confrontation at the door. That's what scared me the most. It was a Tuesday. Nathan had taken the kids to the park after dinner to burn off their energy, and I stayed home because I told him I had a headache. The truth was, I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't touch. My body felt heavy, like gravity had been turned up without my permission. I sat alone on the living room floor, back against the couch, staring at the security monitor. Every camera angle, every corner of our house, every blind spot that had been eliminated. Safe. We were finally safe. So why did it feel like I was still holding my breath? My phone buzzed with a notification from my lawyer's office earlier that day. Updates about court timelines, discovery schedules, potential testimony. Necessary. Controlled. Professional. And yet my chest felt tight like I was drowning. I realized something in that quiet, empty house. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was grieving. Not just my grandfather,
not just the family I thought I had. I was grieving the version of myself that spent her entire life trying to earn love by being reasonable, generous, understanding, by absorbing damage quietly and calling it strength.
I thought about Bella, about how easily she had lied to me, how naturally she'd cried into the phone while already planning what came next. I replayed our childhood memories, searching for signs I'd missed. I wondered how many times I'd mistaken convenience for closeness. I thought about my father.
The way he'd sat across from me in that coffee shop, voice soft, apology polished, phone lighting up in his hand while my house was being violated. The betrayal wasn't just criminal, it was intimate, surgical.
And my grandmother.
Her cold eyes scanning my home, her belief that blood gave her ownership over my life.
The worst part wasn't what they did, it was what it confirmed.
That if I hadn't had money, if there hadn't been something to take, they never would have come back. Not to apologize, not to reconnect, not to love me.
Only to extract.
I slid down onto my side and pressed my face into the carpet, breathing shallowly so I wouldn't make a sound. I didn't want the kids to come home and see me like that. I didn't want Nathan to worry.
Tears came anyway.
Quiet, uncontrolled. The kind that don't feel relieving, just draining. I whispered out loud, to no one.
What if I'm the problem? The question scared me because it felt familiar. I'd asked it my whole life whenever something went wrong in my family, whenever someone lashed out, whenever love turned conditional. But this time the answer came differently. Not from guilt, from exhaustion.
If I were the problem, I thought, then fixing me would have fixed this years ago.
I heard the front door open. Laughter. Footsteps. The kids arguing over something trivial.
I wiped my face and stood up too quickly, dizziness washing over me. I smiled when they ran in, hugged them too tightly, inhaled the scent of grass and sunscreen like it was oxygen. That night, after the kids were asleep, Nathan found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing.
He didn't ask what was wrong.
He just sat across from me and waited. "I don't feel strong," I said finally. "I feel empty."
He reached for my hand. "You don't have to be strong right now."
That's when the truth hit me hardest.
I had been surviving, not healing.
And survival had taken everything out of me. I went to bed that night knowing something had to change. Not legally, not logistically, but internally. Because I couldn't carry this version of my family inside me anymore.
Even if I won every case.
Even if they went to prison.
Even if they disappeared forever. If I didn't let go of the belief that I owed them something, they would still own me.
And that realization, quiet, devastating, undeniable, was the lowest point of my life. The shift didn't come with a victory.
It didn't come with a sentence or a headline or even a moment of satisfaction. It came with evidence.
Hard, undeniable proof that the people I kept trying to understand had never been confused, only calculated. 3 weeks after the arrests, my lawyer called and asked me to come in. His tone was different, focused, controlled, the way professionals sound when they're about to deliver something heavy but important. During discovery, the prosecution had pulled additional data from my father's phone. Old backups, deleted messages, fragments that hadn't been fully recovered before. They weren't just about the break-in.
They went back months,
to the day after I gave Bella the money.
The texts between Bella and my father were methodical.
They talked about timing, about pressure, about how to approach me without making me defensive. Bella wasn't panicking about eviction.
She was brainstorming leverage.
There were messages where she asked how much she should ask for next. Messages where my father advised patience, told her to let me feel generous before making demands. Messages where Jake chimed in with suggestions about finding documents or valuables. Reading them felt like watching strangers wearing my family's faces. The coffee shop meeting appeared in the text too. "Get her out of the house," my father had written.
"Mom and Jake will handle it." I didn't cry when I read them.
I didn't shake. I felt still, because in that moment, every doubt I'd carried dissolved.
This wasn't chaos. This was intent.
The prosecutor told us Jake had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He admitted the break-in was planned, that they'd expected to find documents related to the inheritance, or items they could sell quickly. He admitted Bella knew more than she'd let on. And suddenly something inside me clicked into place.
Not rage, not grief, acceptance.
I wasn't standing in the middle of a misunderstanding anymore. I was standing at the end of a story.
A story where I'd finally reached the last page and realized it had never been about reconciliation.
It had always been about escape.
Around the same time, my lawyer brought up something else.
My mother.
He traced how she found our new address. She'd befriended a real estate agent from the firm that handled our purchase, told her she was helping coordinate furniture delivery, lied convincingly enough that the agent gave her the address. The agent was fired. The company offered a settlement. But what mattered to me was this. My mother hadn't stumbled into our lives. She'd hunted her way back in. Then something unexpected happened. My maternal aunt, Susan, reached out. Not through social media, not through family channels. Through my lawyer. She sent documentation, screenshots, messages. My mother had been telling the extended family that I'd manipulated my grandfather while he had dementia, that I'd stolen from her, that I was refusing to help with medical emergencies that didn't exist. Susan admitted she'd believed it at first, that she was ashamed, that once she started asking questions, the stories fell apart. For the first time in this entire ordeal, someone from my family chose truth over comfort. Susan testified on my behalf when the restraining order against my mother was granted. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for access. She just said, "You didn't deserve this." And that sentence changed something in me. Not because it erased the damage, but because it validated it. From that point on, I stopped framing my choices as reactions. I made decisions. I established the trust, locked down access, built layers of protection that didn't rely on anyone's good intentions. I stopped explaining myself, stopped defending my boundaries. When Jake reached out again through his lawyer, I declined contact. When Bella sent a letter through her attorney, I didn't open it. When my mother tried once more to contact the kids through the school, the evidence sealed her restraining order permanently. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And clarity gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing my life. And I was finally ready to watch the consequences fall where they belonged. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet at first, then relentless. Jake testified. Once he started talking, everything unraveled faster than anyone expected. He admitted not only to the break-in, but to prior discussions about draining money from me over time. He described my father's long-term plan, regain contact, convince me to invest with him, slowly siphon funds under the guise of family business. The coffee shop meeting had been rehearsed. The apology had been scripted. The timing had been intentional. My father's defense collapsed almost immediately. Because this wasn't a moment of desperation, it was a pattern. Prosecutors uncovered insurance fraud schemes from years earlier, false claims, fabricated losses, money funneled through shell accounts, things that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with who he'd always been. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Then more evidence surfaced. 2 additional years were added. In court, he didn't look at me. Not once. My grandmother's health miracle was remarkable. When faced with actual incarceration, the hip pain she'd described in vivid detail suddenly improved. Medical reviews showed she'd never needed surgery, only routine exercises for age-related stiffness. The judge was not amused. She was sentenced to 3 years in the medical wing of a women's correctional facility. She screamed that I'd stolen the family fortune as officers escorted her out. No one responded. Bella's involvement sealed her fate. Text messages proved she wasn't manipulated. She was involved from the beginning. The eviction crisis was fake. The tears were strategy. When she realized how serious the consequences were, she made a deal. Probation, community service, a criminal record that would follow her longer than any money ever could. She sent a letter through her lawyer saying she hadn't understood the consequences. I didn't reply. Some misunderstandings deserve silence. My mother's unraveling was slower and uglier. After violating the restraining order by attempting to take Emma from school under a false dentist appointment, the judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation, severe alcohol dependency, untreated mental illness, mandatory treatment, supervised probation. My Aunt Susan agreed to oversee compliance. That was the only reason I allowed any involvement at all. The rest of the fallout came quietly. Relatives stopped calling once the truth spread. The inheritance lawyers stopped receiving threats. The letters stopped. People disappeared, not because they suddenly respected me, but because there was nothing left to take. Nathan and I moved again, this time far enough that geography itself became a boundary. Different state, different routines, new schools, new names for everyday use, middle names promoted, digital footprints minimized. We didn't announce it. We didn't explain. We just left. The trust was finalized with layers of protection so tight it would take multiple professionals to alter a single provision. College funds locked, charitable donations scheduled, long-term investments stabilized. The money became what it should have been from the beginning: quiet. My old neighborhood faded into memory. The gated house sold. The security contracts ended. The cameras shut off. The weight I'd been carrying, of vigilance, of anticipation, of fear, began to loosen. Not all at once, but enough that I could breathe. The final blow didn't come from a courtroom. It came from the newspaper. A small article, buried, a mention of convictions tied to fraud and conspiracy. My father's name printed in black ink, stripped of excuses. No commentary, no redemption arc, just facts. And in that moment, something inside me finally settled. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. The truth had done what I never could. It had spoken for me. 6 months later, my life looks quiet. And I've learned that quiet is not emptiness. It's peace. Our new home doesn't feel like a fortress. It feels like a place where my kids can leave their shoes by the door and forget them there. Where Nathan and I cook dinner without checking the windows. Where laughter doesn't drop into silence because someone's phone vibrated. The inheritance, the thing that exposed everything, has finally become what my grandfather intended: a foundation. We live modestly. We don't advertise anything. Most people in our lives have no idea about the money, and that's exactly how I want it. It funds college accounts, long-term security, and a few carefully chosen donations, especially to the children's hospital that saved Emma's life. That matters more to me than any car, house, or display ever could. We changed our names slightly. Middle names became first names in everyday life. Social media exists only under locked-down accounts, used sparingly and intentionally. We left no forwarding address. The only family member who knows where we are is my Aunt Susan, because she proved that love doesn't demand access. Sometimes late at night, I think about my grandfather, about how he used to say, money doesn't make people better or worse, it just removes the masks. He was right. The inheritance didn't destroy my family. It revealed it. And that revelation, painful as it was, gave me something priceless: clarity. I no longer waste energy wondering if I should have tried harder. I don't replay conversations hoping I could have said the perfect thing to make them love me correctly. I don't carry guilt for choosing safety over tradition. Because family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who protect your peace. The lesson I carry forward is simple, but not easy. When someone shows you who they are, especially when money, power, or desperation is involved, believe them the first time. Protect yourself legally, emotionally, and physically. Boundaries are not cruelty. Silence is not betrayal. Walking away is not weakness. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to fix what was never yours to repair. I'm no longer the daughter who waits for approval. I'm no longer the sister who pays for peace. I'm no longer the family safety net. I'm just a woman building a life that finally feels like it belongs to me. And that, after everything, is enough.